I knew something was wrong before I even turned off the engine, because you don't usually hear heavy machinery echoing through mountain property at 6:30 in the evening unless somebody's either building something expensive or destroying something they shouldn't be touching. I had just come back from the grocery store in town, truck bed full of feed bags and bottled water, and as I pulled around the bend near my lower driveway, I saw a yellow excavator sitting halfway up my hillside like it owned the place. Dirt was piled everywhere, fresh trench cut straight through the cedar line, mud tracks running across land I'd spent 14 years paying off inch by inch. At first I honestly thought maybe the county had screwed up a utility marker or something. Then I saw the pipe. White PVC running downhill, directly toward my spring house. And that's when my stomach dropped. See, my property wasn't just 5 acres of random mountain dirt. That spring was the reason the land had value in the first place. Folks around Black Hollow County knew about that water source for decades because during dry summers, half the surrounding wells slowed to a trickle while mine kept flowing cold and clear year-round. The original owner built that spring system back in the late 1950s, and when I bought the property from his grandson in 2012, the water rights came with it. Crystal clear in the deed, surveyed, recorded, no confusion, no shared easement, no handshake agreement nonsense, mine. So imagine my reaction when I walk down there and find a half-finished pump system already bolted into the ground like these people were installing internet service. I pulled out my phone immediately and started recording everything because the older I get, the more I realize people act real different once cameras show up. And sure enough, the moment one of the workers noticed me filming, everybody suddenly got quiet. One guy literally stopped digging mid-scoop and stared at me like he'd just realized the homeowner wasn't supposed to be home yet. Then I heard a voice uphill yell, "Hey, we're good down there." And down comes this guy wearing hiking boots so clean they still had store creases in them. His name was Trevor. Him and his wife Madison had moved out from Seattle maybe 2 months earlier after buying the empty ridge lot above mine. They were building one of those modern luxury cabins with black steel siding and giant glass walls, the kind of house that looks less like a home and more like a crypto investor's midlife crisis. First time I met Trevor, he acted friendly enough. Came down while I was replacing the spring cover after a storm, asking all kinds of questions about water pressure and runoff patterns, pretending to be fascinated by off-grid living, like he was filming a documentary for social media. I remember telling him, very clearly, that the spring sat entirely inside my eastern boundary and that I maintained it personally, because around here water is survival, not decoration. He smiled, nodded, acted respectful, which now, looking back, was probably just reconnaissance. So there we were, standing beside a trench carved across my property, and Trevor hits me with this casual little shrug like we're discussing lawn furniture. "Oh, yeah, our contractor said this spring feeds the whole basin," he said. "There's plenty of water, man. This setup won't affect you at all." I actually laughed when he said that because sometimes people are so unbelievably entitled your brain needs a second to process it. I told him, "You dug a line across private property and tapped directly into my water source." And his entire face changed. That fake outdoors of friendliness vanished immediately. "Well," he said, "our hydrology consultant believes it's part of a shared aquifer system." Shared aquifer system. You ever notice how rich people always magically discover technical vocabulary the moment they want somebody else's stuff? Then he crossed his arms and hit me with the sentence that started this entire war. "Honestly," he said, "if you think you can stop the project, get a lawyer." Not gonna lie, that one got under my skin. Because it wasn't just arrogance, it was calculated. He genuinely thought money and legal pressure would make me back down quietly like some old mountain guy too exhausted to fight city people with consultants and architects. Meanwhile, his crew just kept working behind him, drilling, tightening fittings, laying more pipe across my land while he stood there talking to me like I should feel lucky they were sharing resources. That's the thing people from outside these rural communities never understand. Around here, land isn't just property. It's memory. It's family. It's the years you spent fixing fences in the rain and hauling gravel yourself because you couldn't afford contractors. And water? Water is sacred. You don't touch another man's water source unless you're looking for trouble. So I looked Trevor dead in the eye and told him, "You've got exactly one chance to remove every inch of this system before I make your life unbelievably expensive." He smirked, actually smirked. then turned around and walked back toward his construction site while the excavator fired up again behind him. And standing there listening to metal tear through my hillside, I realized something. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a power move. Now let me pause the story for a second because this part right here, this is where a lot of people get themselves completely wrecked legally without even realizing it. See, folks hear words like shared groundwater or community access and suddenly assume water laws work like some kind of neighborhood potluck where everybody gets a turn with the casserole dish. That is absolutely not how this works. According to standard procedure, property boundaries, recorded easements, and historical water rights are everything in disputes like this, especially in rural counties where spring systems existed long before modern development showed up. If a spring is documented on surveyed private land and maintained exclusively by one property owner for decades, courts usually treat that infrastructure the same way they treat a septic system or electrical service, meaning you don't just hook yourself into it because your contractor thinks it's probably fine. From a legal perspective, Trevor's biggest mistake wasn't even touching the water line. It was continuing construction after being formally warned. The second somebody tells you, in writing, that you may be trespassing or interfering with utility rights, any smart contractor backs off immediately until attorneys sort it out. But ego does weird things to people, especially newcomers who move into rural areas thinking money automatically outranks local history. And psychologically, this is a textbook dominance play. This is a psychological trap people fall into when they confuse confidence with authority. Trevor wasn't trying to negotiate. He was trying to overwhelm. Expensive lawyer language, consultants, constant construction activity. The goal was to make me feel outmatched before the fight even started. Because a lot of people will surrender just to avoid stress. Problem was, he picked the wrong mountain to test that theory on. The next morning, I drove straight into town and parked outside a law office that looked like it hadn't changed since the Reagan administration. Brass lettering on the window, faded American flag out front, coffee smell baked permanently into the walls, and behind a desk stacked with paper files sat a man named Walter Grady, probably the closest thing Black Hollow County had to a legal bulldozer. Walter had handled land disputes, logging fights, inheritance wars. Hell, rumor was he once got a judge removed over a cattle easement case back in the 90s. So when I spread my deed, surveys, and water records across his desk, he didn't even blink. He adjusted his glasses, flipped through the documents slowly, then leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, this one's easy." Those are beautiful words when your blood pressure's been sitting at homicide levels for 12 straight hours. Walter pointed directly at the survey map and tapped the spring location with his pen. "This source sits entirely within your parcel boundary," he said. "And based on maintenance records, historical use, and county registration, they have absolutely no legal claim to tap into it." Then he looked at me and smiled a little. Frankly, they're either incredibly ignorant or incredibly arrogant. Turns out the answer was both. Walter immediately sent Trevor and Madison a formal cease and desist notice demanding removal of every pipe, fitting, pump, and trench crossing my property within 12 days. Pretty standard stuff. Most people, once they realize they're exposed legally, pull back and negotiate. Trevor? Oh no. Trevor doubled down. 3 days later, Walter received a response from some giant Seattle law firm with one of those painfully aggressive letters written by people who bill $600 an hour to weaponize paragraphs. They claimed the spring connected to a regionally shared hydrological basin and argued my exclusive rights were subject to reasonable neighboring access, which is legal language for, "We want your water but dressed up in expensive vocabulary." Then came the part that really irritated me. They proposed a temporary cooperative sharing arrangement while litigation proceeded. Cooperative. That word did a lot of heavy lifting in that letter because what they actually meant was, we already built the system, so now we want permission after the fact. Walter read the whole thing twice, chuckled, then tossed it onto his desk. "They think intimidation counts as legal strategy," he said. "Cute. So we filed for immediate injunctive relief and property restoration damages." And while all this legal back and forth was happening, Trevor's construction crew kept working. That's what made the entire situation surreal. Every day I'd wake up and hear machinery echoing through the hills like they were racing against the courthouse clock. More trenching, more fittings, They installed a pressure tank bigger than my first apartment refrigerator, ran electrical conduit uphill toward their cabin site. At one point I walked down there and saw 3 contractors standing on my land drinking coffee beside my spring house like it was public property. I asked one guy if he even knew whose land he was standing on, and he looked genuinely uncomfortable before mumbling, "We're just following orders, man." Yeah, history's been full of people saying that. A week later, I confronted Trevor again near the access road. He was wearing sunglasses and carrying rolled-up architectural plans under one arm, like some HGTV villain. I asked him point-blank why construction was continuing after legal notice had already been served. And this guy, I swear to God, gives me this calm little smile and says, "Our legal team advised us to complete the infrastructure before the hearing." Before the hearing. Like if they finished fast enough, reality would somehow become negotiable. I remember staring at him thinking, this man has spent his entire adult life believing consequences are optional. That's dangerous. Because people like that eventually push too far simply because nobody stopped them earlier in life. 7 weeks later, we finally ended up in county court. Tiny courtroom, wood panel walls, old ceiling fans buzzing overhead. The kind of place where ranch disputes and divorce hearings happen back to back. Trevor and Madison showed up looking like they were attending a tech conference. Expensive coats, polished shoes, stacks of binders carried by junior associates. Meanwhile, Walter walked in carrying one cracked leather folder and a thermos of black coffee, which honestly made me feel better immediately. Judge Eleanor Pike presided over the hearing, and right away you could tell she wasn't interested in theatrics. Trevor's attorney launched into this polished presentation about groundwater systems, sustainable resource allocation, regional access expectations. All these fancy phrases carefully designed to blur one simple fact. They had dug onto land they did not own. Then Walter stood up. No dramatic performance. No legal gymnastics. He simply walked the judge through the deed history, county maps, maintenance documentation, historical spring registration, and photographic evidence showing the trench crossing directly through my property boundary. Clean. Simple. Surgical. At one point, Judge Pike interrupted Trevor's attorney and asked a question that basically detonated their entire case. Did your clients obtain written access permission before excavation? Silence. Long silence. Trevor's lawyer shuffled papers. Madison looked down at the table. And Trevor actually looked irritated. Like the judge was wasting his time by asking obvious questions. Finally, the attorney admitted. No formal written permission was obtained. That was the moment I knew they were finished. Because judges hate arrogance almost as much as they hate trespassing. 20 minutes later, Judge Pike issued the ruling. I still remember her exact tone because it sounded less angry than disappointed, like a teacher dealing with a particularly dumb student. The ownership documents and water rights are unambiguous, she said. The spring belongs exclusively to the plaintiff. The defendants are ordered to remove all unauthorized infrastructure crossing the plaintiff's property within 10 calendar days and restore the disturbed land to its original condition. Then came my favorite part. Failure to comply, she continued, will authorize the plaintiff to conduct removal independently and recover all associated costs. Trevor leaned back in his chair and actually exhaled sharply through his nose like the whole thing was beneath him. Madison whispered something to him while his attorneys packed up quietly. Walter just closed his folder and whispered to me, "Watch this carefully. People who lose gracefully fix problems quickly. People with ego problems create bigger disasters." Turns out Walter knew exactly what was coming. 10 days passed. Nothing changed. Not one pipe removed. Not one trench filled. In fact, they finished the system completely. The pump was operational. The tank was connected. Water was actively flowing uphill to their cabin site through infrastructure sitting illegally across my land under direct court order to remove it. That level of stubbornness almost impressed me. Almost. So on day 11, I made a few phone calls. First call went to the sheriff's department because I wanted zero confusion when this started. Second call went to a guy named Hector Ruiz, a utility contractor who'd worked half the county for 30 years and owned equipment capable of removing just about anything short of a nuclear submarine. Hector showed up at sunrise with 2 crew trucks, a backhoe, trench equipment, and 3 workers who looked way too excited to spend the day legally dismantling rich people nonsense. Walter came too, mostly to document everything for reimbursement claims later. We parked near the lower access road just after 7 in the morning. Fog still hanging over the hillside. Birds chirping. Peaceful as could be. Except for the sound of Trevor screaming the moment he spotted the excavator. He came storming downhill wearing joggers and some overpriced fleece jacket, yelling before he even reached us. "You can't touch that system," he shouted. Walter calmly held up the court order. "Actually," he said, "we can." Trevor grabbed the paperwork, scanned it furiously, then pointed at me like I'd personally offended civilization itself. "This is harassment," he snapped. "Do you understand how much money is invested in that infrastructure?" And that right there, that was the funniest part of the entire ordeal. Because not once, not one single time, did he acknowledge the land wasn't his. To Trevor, ownership was apparently just whoever spent the most money the fastest. Hector didn't wait for the argument to finish. His crew got to work immediately. Excavator bucket dropped into the trench line with a metallic crunch, ripping up sections of PVC pipe like uncooked spaghetti. Workers disconnected the pressure tank, removed electrical components, dismantled the pump housing beside the spring box. The whole luxury water system Trevor fought so hard to protect started coming apart piece by piece in front of him. And Trevor completely unraveled. At one point he threatened lawsuits, then criminal charges. Then he started filming us on his phone while yelling that we were destroying private infrastructure. Hector just kept working while chewing sunflower seeds like this was a completely normal Tuesday. Madison eventually came down too, but unlike Trevor, she looked panicked. Not angry, panicked. Because I think somewhere deep down she realized this entire nightmare could have been avoided if they'd simply asked permission in the beginning instead of trying to overpower a local property owner with lawyers and attitude. By lunchtime the tank was gone. By early afternoon every inch of unauthorized pipe had been removed. Hector's crew filled the trench, compacted the soil, reseeded damaged sections near the hillside, and restored access around the spring house better than it looked before Trevor ever touched it. 5 hours. That's all it took. 5 hours to erase months of arrogance. And the best part? Trevor got billed for every second of it. Equipment costs, labor, restoration, legal fees, survey review, everything. Walter later told me the reimbursement total hit high enough that Trevor nearly halted construction on the cabin altogether, which honestly felt poetic, because in the end, he didn't lose over water. He lost because he mistook wealth for authority and confused rural kindness with weakness. You know, after everything finally settled down and the hills got quiet again, I kept thinking about something my grandfather used to say whenever somebody rolled into town acting bigger than the community around them. He'd say, "A man who doesn't respect boundaries usually learns about them the hard way." And honestly, that's exactly what this whole mess became. Because this was never really about water. Not entirely. The water was just the excuse. The real conflict was control. Trevor and Madison came into a rural mountain community carrying this invisible assumption that money, consultants, and confidence automatically placed them above the people already living there. And to be fair, that strategy probably worked for them plenty of times before. In cities, people avoid confrontation. Most neighbors don't know property law, don't document anything, don't fight back because legal stress is exhausting and expensive. But rural communities work differently. Folks out here remember property lines the same way families remember birthdays. They know which fence post belonged to whose grandfather. They know who maintained the roads after storms. Respect matters here because survival used to depend on it. The lesson here is, entitlement becomes dangerous when it mixes with convenience. Trevor convinced himself that because the spring was useful, access to it should somehow become negotiable. That's a psychological shortcut a lot of people take nowadays. They confuse wanting something badly with deserving it legally. And once somebody starts rationalizing that mindset, every boundary starts looking temporary. According to standard procedure, if you want access to another person's land, utilities, water systems, or easements, you ask first. You get agreements in writing. You negotiate honestly. You don't bulldoze ahead hoping money and momentum will intimidate people into surrender. Because from a legal perspective, courts care a whole lot more about documented rights than emotional arguments about fairness. Especially when trespassing and unauthorized construction get involved. And look, I'll be honest, part of me almost felt sorry for Madison near the end. She looked like somebody realizing too late that confidence and competence are not the same thing. But Trevor? Nah. Guys like that usually don't learn until consequences become expensive enough to break through the ego. The crazy part is this entire disaster could have been avoided with one respectful conversation and a simple request. Instead, it turned into lawsuits, public humiliation, restoration bills, and a mountain neighborhood that will probably talk about the spring guy from Seattle for the next 20 years. So now I'm curious, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have tried negotiating a shared water agreement, or gone straight to court the moment the trench crossed your property line? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this always divide people right down the middle. And if you enjoy real-world property disputes, HOA nightmares, and situations where arrogance crashes headfirst into reality, stick around, because trust me, this town has plenty more stories.